Thank you very much, and thank you for joining us today at Coin Street here in such an important community centre, because our plans today that we are launching, Labour's manifesto on crime and justice, is about putting communities and victims at the heart of the criminal justice system. The Tories and the Liberal Democrats have let communities and victims down over the last 5 years. We've seen neighbourhood policing being badly eroded, people noticing far fewer police on our streets as 17,000 officers have gone, and chief constables warning that they will have to abandon neighbourhood policing altogether if the Tories' extreme cuts go ahead in the next 5 years. And that would be highly damaging to British policing and to what we value so much in that partnership between the police and the communities, that partnership that's about preventing crime, about tackling offenders, and about supporting victims and keeping our communities strong. We know that 999 weights are up in some areas by as much as 50%. We've seen the clock turned back on justice, although, for example, more cases of rape or child sex offences and domestic abuse have been reported, there have been fewer arrests and prosecutions, and that means that victims are not getting justice or protection, and criminals are getting away with some of the most serious crimes. Not enough has been done to tackle long-term violence against women and girls. And crime is changing too. So car crime and theft have continued their 20-year fall, but hidden crimes and new crimes are emerging and increasing, and the Home Office has not provided leadership. The police are finding it hard to keep up. So, for example, for child sexual exploitation, there's been a 60% increase in reports to the police, but a 9% drop in arrests. We've seen, for example, for online child abuse, cases not being followed up and huge long delays in investigating serious crimes. And people need to feel safe and secure in their communities, on the streets, online. As Ed Miliband said earlier this week, we all use the same roads, we're all protected by our police and our armed forces, or rely on our NHS. It's what he called the common good. And that's why we believe that Britain only succeeds when people feel secure, when working families across the country can feel confident in their communities, confident of being able to work with the public services to keep people safe. People need to know that if the worst happens, the police and criminal justice system will be there to help and protect them. To know that victims' voices will be heard when too often they haven't been, especially for our children. And that our communities will stay strong and not be divided. The Tories and Liberal Democrats have turned the clock back in too many areas, but their plans for the next Parliament would be worse. Deeper cuts in the next few years than in the last, according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies. Neighbourhood policing lost from our streets in too many areas, and no leadership on new and changing crimes. So Labour has an alternative plan that we are setting out today. It's fully costed and set out, and it starts with protecting neighbourhood policing. Bobbies on the beat known to local people, and forces will be required to set out a local policing commitment for every area as part of a plan which protects over 10,000 police officers from Tory cuts over the next 3 years, using £800 million of savings that we have identified that the Conservatives can't and won't match. That includes stopping the subsidy to gun licences. It includes requiring forces to do joint procurement of basic equipment, because we know that some forces spend 4 times as much as others on the same basic equipment. And that's something that Conservative ministers have repeatedly refused to do and ruled out, even though it could save £400 million a year. And whilst we know that there are Labour police and crime commissioners who've worked hard to make the system work, we believe that the system is fundamentally flawed. And so we will abolish police and crime commissioners and put that money and those savings back into the front line. Overall, it's £800 million of savings a year. Over the first 3 years, we can use that money to make sure that chief constables will be able to protect over 10,000 police officers, protect the front line and keep our communities safe. But we'll bring in other reforms as well, reforms to improve standards, to strengthen local accountability, raise professional standards with new chartered police officers, registered with the College of Policing so they can be struck off for misconduct, serious misconduct, just as doctors and lawyers can be. to strengthen the system of investigation and inspection, replacing the IPCC, which is simply not strong enough, with a new police standards authority. We'll reform the practice of stop and search, making it clear in the law that stopping someone on the basis of the colour of their skin is illegal, discriminatory and wrong. And we will work with the police to increase diversity and BME recruitment so that our police reflect the communities that they serve. And as you know, Labour has long believed we need to be tough on crime and tough on the causes of crime. So that means we want stronger work on prevention of crime before it happens, working to make sure that antisocial behaviour is nipped in the bud and offenders are made to put right the wrong that they have done. And instead of low-level cautions, which have no immediate consequences, the police will be able to issue payback orders requiring offenders to pay back to their victims and communities. Stronger partnerships between the police and local authorities in order to prevent crime too. And we will bring in tough new laws to confront child sexual exploitation, including powers to prevent an adult from contacting or communicating with a child if there's evidence of abuse, something police in many areas have called for. We'll support the Justice Goddard inquiry, and we believe that it should be able to include allegations related to Northern Ireland as well, and we would extend its scope. We'll set up a new child protection unit between the Home Office and Department for Education to strengthen the work to support children, to make sure that children's voices are heard and strengthen child protection, introducing mandatory reporting of abuse so that no one can turn a blind eye, and make sure that people who have been convicted of sex offences should be barred from working with children. Because over the last few years, there's been 10,000 fewer sex offenders, convicted sex offenders, have been barred from working with children, and we think that is wrong. We'll also publish the first UK-wide Violence Against Women and Girls Bill. We're setting up a commissioner to enforce national minimum standards in preventing domestic and sexual violence. 2 women a week are still killed as a result of violence from an ex or from a partner. If there was that level of violence at football matches, there'd be a national outcry. There'd be a government task force. There'd be new laws. That is what we think is needed for violence against women and girls. And that is why we will have a dedicated minister for violence against women and girls too, why we'll ban the use of community resolutions as a response to domestic violence, consult on strengthening the law to prevent female genital mutilation, tighten the gun licensing regime so that people with a history of domestic or sexual violence will not be given an unrestricted license, and make sure that rape suspects should have their DNA recorded and stored. And perhaps most important of all, when it comes to the next generation, we will make sure that there is compulsory sex and relationship education in all of our schools to teach zero tolerance of violence to all of our young people. And we need to make sure that the police can deal with all forms of changing crime, making sure that they have the technology, the IT experts in order to deal with online crime, working with the private sector to do so, but also to deal with growing extremism and the terrorist threat. And that's why Labour will lead a robust response to extremism and the terrorist threat, so that dangerous suspects must be subject to proper controls. We argued, for example, that Theresa May was wrong to scrap control orders and to lose relocation powers, and the TPIMs are still not being used. And we believe that dangerous terrorist suspects should be subject to the proper controls, but we would also bring in new powers so that those who are returning from Syria, in addition to the prosecutions and investigations that the police need to pursue, can also be required to attend the de-radicalisation channel programme as well on their return. But we will also work more widely on prevention, because the PREVENT programme needs to be overhauled and needs to be broadened. We would broaden it to more areas, and we would put communities back at the heart of the PREVENT programme, where I think that has been lost and where we know there are so much more communities themselves need to be able to do to prevent extremism. We take a zero-tolerance approach to hate crime, such as anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, make sure that hate crime is properly recorded, including incidents of Islamophobia being recorded separately, and strengthen the law on homophobic, disability and transphobic hate crime as well, and challenge prejudice before it grows wherever it may be found. And we will make sure too the police and intelligence agencies can keep up with new technology to keep us safe, and also that the oversight keeps up as well, and we will reform the law to do that. So our plan puts victims and communities at the heart of our reforms. It makes sure victims' voices can be heard, makes sure children's voices can be heard, not ignoring hidden crimes, keeping up with changing patterns of crime, and making sure that communities are not ignored and abandoned. It means standing up for law-abiding people across the country, keeping the police on the beat. It means being tough on crime and its causes. It means preventing crime and getting the system to work to deliver justice. And in the end, I end where I started, because neighbourhood policing is actually at the heart of all of those things. It is about those partnerships between police and communities. It is about standing up for victims. It's about building trust in the system. And neighbourhood policing is far too important to let the Tories destroy it. That is why Labour is setting out an alternative plan. Those are our plans for particularly around policing and crime and keeping the communities at the heart of the system. But now I'm going to ask Sadiq Khan to set out our plans for putting victims at the heart of the whole criminal justice system.
Thank you, Yvette, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning. Today's mini manifesto pulls together Labour's plans on how we propose to make our communities safer. One of the threads running through today's report is that for too many people, our justice system is letting them down. Victims are being let down by a system that ignores them or at best treats them as an afterthought. Communities are being let down by a system which isn't doing enough to stop criminals repeat offending from blighting their area. After 5 years, it's clear that this government doesn't have the solutions. In fact, their actions have made many of these problems worse. Take victims. Time and again, we hear the horror stories of how innocent victims of crime are treated appallingly. Some of the victims of child sex abuse are on record saying they'd never have come forward if they'd realised the cross-examination in court was going to be so horrific. We all remember how Millie Dowler's family were treated at the trial of Millie's killer. Too many people do the right thing and tell the police about a crime only to never hear another thing. And too many victims only find out about their perpetrator's release from prison when they bump into them at the local supermarket. We need to transform the culture of our justice system. And to get that cultural change, Labour is committed to bringing in this country's first ever victims' law. I'd like to thank Keir, Doreen Lawrence and Peter Nehru for the report they produced. That will form the basis of the new law. Labour is promising to enshrine in legislation the basic entitlements victims should expect from our police, courts, prosecution services, prisons and probation. About what information they should receive when and from whom. People will have the right to have cases reviewed if charges aren't brought. They'll have a right to be treated decently and with dignity in the courtroom. Now, this government's had the opportunity to bring in a victims' law, but they failed to do so. But we think it's crucial, and the next Labour government will deliver this. But just as we need victims and witnesses to be treated with dignity, we also need a justice system that catches, prosecutes, punishes, and reforms those guilty of committing crimes. And it is failing in this objective. Already Yvette's spoken about what we'll do on police numbers to give our chief constables the resources they need to catch criminals. But victims rightly want those who've committed crimes against them punished, and also to see them reformed as well. They don't want anyone else to suffer in the future as they have done. So our prisons and probation system have an important role in both punishing and reforming. But the system is in chaos. Prisons are dens of violence, with deaths and suicide commonplace. Inmates are being released having spent their time idling in their cells instead of working or on courses or training. Probation has been split up and recklessly sold off to the highest bidder. Supervision in the community of dangerous and violent offenders is now taking place by companies with no track record in this area. Just last week, we saw Sadiq announce massive job losses, replacing experienced probation officers with call centres and machines. It's public safety that will suffer. Now, the Chief Inspector of Prisons was sacked for daring to tell the truth on how bad things are. A Chief Inspector of Probation was appointed by ministers who was hopelessly compromised by his links to Sodexo. Instead of making prisons work, ridding them of drugs, reducing violence, the government's priority was banning the sending of books to prisons. Now, the next Labour government's going to inherit a mess, but we're determined to roll up our sleeves and begin the job of repairing the damage. We have a better plan for safer communities. The document you'll receive on your way out includes specific commitments on how we'll build on the success of the youth justice system in cutting crime by duplicating the same way of working for young adults. But it will cancel their silly and dangerous plans for a super prison for children. We'll overhaul prisons so they're incentivised to do more on training and work to cut reoffending. And we'll end the merry-go-round of governors chopping and changing. We'll look at introducing a chartered prisoner officer standard, and we'll clamp down on corruption to stop contraband and drugs getting into jails. And we'll make the inspection regime truly independent so people can have confidence it will not be politically manipulated. And on probation, we'll pore over all the private contracts trying to find a way out of them, and we'll hold the companies to account on delivery. We will not allow profit to get in the way of keeping the public safe. Now, our full manifesto will be published next week, and there's much more there on health, on housing, education, and lots of other important factors that will help crime not be committed in the first place. As Yvette said, tough on the causes of crime. But without people's confidence, our justice system would simply not work. Our proposals today are about restoring faith in our justice system and repairing the damage done to people's confidence in the government. Thank you.